Egypt's king feared the growing Hebrew nation.
Every newborn Hebrew boy must be killed. It is done, my Pharaoh.
Fear spread through every Hebrew home. But one courageous mother refused to surrender her child. For 3 months, she secretly hid her baby, praying every day that God would protect him.
When she could hide him no longer, she carefully placed her son inside a waterproof basket and carried him to the Nile River. The tiny basket floated gently among the reeds while his sister watched from a distance, wondering if she would ever see her brother again.
At that very moment, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe. She noticed the mysterious basket drifting toward her.
When the princess opened the basket, the baby cried. Her heart filled with compassion. She had no idea she was holding the future deliverer of Israel.
How would a Hebrew baby become an Egyptian prince?
Years passed, and the rescued Hebrew baby grew into a strong and respected prince inside Pharaoh's magnificent palace. Moses received the finest education in Egypt, mastering leadership, warfare, languages, and the wisdom of the greatest kingdom on earth. To everyone around him, he was royalty, destined for greatness. But deep inside, Moses carried a secret that few people knew. He wasn't born an Egyptian. He was a Hebrew, the son of a people suffering as slaves under Pharaoh's rule. Every day he lived between two worlds. One gave him wealth, honor, and power. The other was filled with pain, oppression, and the cries of his own people. Then one day, everything changed. Moses witnessed an Egyptian brutally beating a Hebrew slave. In that moment, his heart could no longer ignore the truth. Would the prince stay loyal to Pharaoh or risk everything for his own people? Moses could no longer ignore the suffering of his people. One day he saw an Egyptian slave master brutally beating a helpless Hebrew man. Filled with anger and compassion, Moses looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he stepped in to defend the Hebrew. In the struggle, Moses struck the Egyptian and killed him. Believing no one had seen what happened, he buried the Egyptian's body in the sand, hoping the secret would stay hidden forever. But the next day, Moses discovered the truth. The people already knew what he had done, and word quickly spread throughout Egypt. Soon Pharaoh heard about the incident. Furious, he ordered his soldiers to capture Moses and put him to death. The prince who once lived in luxury suddenly became Egypt's most wanted fugitive. With no other choice, Moses fled into the wilderness, leaving behind the palace, his family, and everything he had ever known. But this wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning. Will Moses survive the desert, or will his journey end there? With Pharaoh's soldiers closing in, Moses fled deep into the wilderness, leaving behind the palace, his wealth, and everything he had ever known. Day after day, he wandered across the scorching desert, exhausted, hungry, and uncertain of what the future held. The prince of Egypt had become a lonely fugitive. At last, Moses arrived in the land of Midian. There beside a well, he rested, unaware that God was already guiding his next step. When a group of shepherds tried to chase away the daughters of Jethro, a priest of Midian, Moses rose up, drove the men off, and stepped in to help the women water their flock. Grateful for his kindness, Jethro welcomed Moses into his home. In time, Moses married Zipporah and began a completely new life as a humble shepherd. For 40 years, Moses faithfully cared for sheep in the wilderness, never imagining that God was preparing him for a mission greater than he could ever dream. But one ordinary day, everything was about to change. A mysterious fire would call Moses into his divine purpose. One ordinary day, while leading his flock near Mount Horeb, something extraordinary caught his attention. A bush was completely engulfed in flames, yet it wasn't being consumed. Curious, Moses walked closer to investigate the mysterious sight. Then from the middle of the fire, a voice called out, "Moses! Moses!" Trembling with fear, Moses answered, "Here I am." God said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Then God revealed his purpose. "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries, and I have come to rescue them." Finally, God gave Moses the mission that would change history forever. "Now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Can an 80-year-old shepherd really stand before the most powerful king on earth? Although God had called him, Moses was afraid. He answered, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" But God reassured him, saying, "I will be with you." Then God revealed his holy name, "I am who I am." He commanded Moses to tell the Israelites, "I am has sent me to you." Still unsure of himself, Moses worried that no one would believe him. So God performed miraculous signs before his eyes. Moses threw down his shepherd's staff, and it became a living snake. When God told him to pick it up again, it turned back into a staff. Then God instructed Moses to place his hand inside his cloak. When he pulled it out, it was covered with a skin disease. But after placing it inside his cloak once more, his hand was completely healed. Even after witnessing these miracles, Moses pleaded, "Please, Lord, I am not a good speaker." But God replied, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Now go. I will help you speak and teach you what to say." God also appointed Moses' brother Aaron to speak on his behalf. Strengthened by God's promise, Moses prepared to leave Midian and return to Egypt, the place he had fled 40 years earlier. Can Moses really stand before Pharaoh and demand the freedom of an entire nation? Seeing Moses' discouragement, God spoke with power. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. By my mighty hand, he will let my people go." God reminded Moses of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. "I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, and I will bring them out from under the burden of Egypt." Then God made 7 incredible promises. "I will bring you out. I will free you. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will take you as my people. I will be your God. I will bring you into the promised land, and I will give it to you as your inheritance." Moses shared God's message with the Israelites, but years of cruel slavery had crushed their spirits. They were too discouraged to believe his words. Still, God commanded Moses and Aaron to return to Pharaoh. Egypt saw God as God had commanded. Moses and Aaron stood once again before Pharaoh. This time, Pharaoh demanded proof that they had truly been sent by the God of Israel. At God's instruction, Aaron threw down his staff, and it instantly became a living snake. The royal court watched in amazement as it slithered across the palace floor. But Pharaoh summoned his magicians, and using their secret arts, they also threw down their staffs, which became snakes. For a brief moment, it appeared that Egypt's magic could rival God's power. Then something extraordinary happened. Aaron's snake swallowed every one of the magician's snakes, proving that the living God was greater than all the power of Egypt. Yet Pharaoh hardened his heart and refused to listen to Moses and Aaron. The battle had only begun, and Egypt was about to witness signs and plagues unlike anything the world had ever seen. Will Pharaoh surrender after the first plague, or continue to defy the Almighty? Pharaoh's heart remained hard, and he still refused to let God's people go. Then the Lord commanded Moses, "Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes down to the Nile." Standing on the riverbank, Moses lifted Aaron's staff and declared God's warning. "By this you will know that the Lord is God. Let my people go, or Egypt will suffer the consequences." At God's command, Aaron struck the waters of the Nile with his staff. Instantly, the mighty river turned into blood before Pharaoh's eyes. Fish died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could no longer drink its water. Blood covered every river, canal, pond, and reservoir throughout the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh's magicians imitated the miracle with their secret arts. Instead of humbling himself, Pharaoh hardened his heart once again and walked back into his palace without repentance. The Egyptians desperately dug along the banks of the Nile, searching for clean water to drink, while the first plague continued for 7 days. Would Pharaoh finally surrender after the Nile turned to blood? Or would an even greater plague strike Egypt next? After 7 days, the plague of blood came to an end. But Pharaoh's heart remained as hard as ever. He still refused to let the Israelites go. Then the Lord spoke to Moses once again. "Go to Pharaoh and say, 'This is what the Lord says. Let my people go, so they may worship me. If you refuse, I will send frogs over your entire land.'" At God's command, Aaron stretched out his staff over the rivers, canals, and ponds of Egypt. Suddenly, frogs poured out of the water in countless numbers. They covered the land, filling every corner of Egypt. The frogs invaded Pharaoh's palace, his bedroom, and even climbed onto his bed. They filled the houses of his officials and the homes of ordinary Egyptians. They covered ovens, kneading bowls in kitchens where food was prepared. There was no place to escape them. But Pharaoh's magicians used their secret arts and also brought up frogs upon the land. Yet they could not remove a single one. Overwhelmed by the plague, Pharaoh finally called for Moses and Aaron. Would this be the moment he surrendered to the living God? Or would his hardened heart once again refuse to obey? Overwhelmed by the plague of frogs, Pharaoh finally summoned Moses and Aaron. He pleaded, "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let the Israelites go to worship him." Moses replied, "Tell me when you want me to pray for you." Pharaoh answered, "Tomorrow." Moses said, "It will be as you have said, so you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God." Moses cried out to the Lord, and God answered. The frogs died in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields. They were piled into great heaps across the land, and a terrible smell filled Egypt. But as soon as Pharaoh saw there was relief, he hardened his heart once again. He broke his promise and refused to let the Israelites go, just as the Lord had said. Then God commanded Aaron, "Stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground." Instantly, the dust throughout Egypt became tiny gnats, covering both people and animals. The magicians tried to copy this miracle, but they failed. Amazed, they confessed to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Would Pharaoh finally listen, or continue to defy the God even his own magicians recognized? Even after his own magicians admitted, "This is the finger of God," Pharaoh refused to listen. His heart remained hard, and he would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and tell him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so they may worship me. If you refuse, I will send swarms of flies upon you, your officials, and all the people of Egypt." The next day, dense swarms of flies filled Pharaoh's palace and covered homes throughout Egypt. The land was ruined because of the countless flies, but in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there were no flies at all. God made a clear distinction between his people and the Egyptians. Desperate, Pharaoh called Moses and offered a compromise. "Go, sacrifice to your God here in Egypt." But Moses refused, explaining that God had commanded them to worship in the wilderness. Pharaoh reluctantly agreed to let the Israelites go, but only if they did not travel far. Was Pharaoh finally ready to keep his word, or was another betrayal about to unfold? Pharaoh agreed to let the Israelites go, but only if they did not travel far. Moses left Pharaoh's presence and prayed to the Lord, asking him to remove the plague of flies. The Lord answered Moses' prayer. Every fly disappeared from Pharaoh's palace, his officials, and the homes of Egypt. Not a single fly remained. But the moment Pharaoh saw there was relief, he hardened his heart once again. He broke his promise and refused to let the Israelites leave. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. "Go to Pharaoh and say, 'This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go, so they may worship me. If you refuse, my hand will strike your livestock in the fields.'" The next day, a deadly plague swept across Egypt. Horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats began to die throughout the land. Yet in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, not a single animal died. God once again made a clear distinction between his people and Egypt. Would Pharaoh finally surrender after losing Egypt's livestock? Or would his stubborn heart bring an even greater judgment? Even after Egypt's livestock perished, Pharaoh refused to humble himself. His heart remained stubborn, and he would not let God's people go. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace and toss it into the air before Pharaoh." Moses obeyed, and the fine ash spread across the land of Egypt. Immediately, painful boils broke out on people and animals throughout the country. The sores covered the Egyptians from head to toe, bringing great suffering to the land. Even Pharaoh's magicians could not stand before Moses because they too were covered with painful boils. The men who once opposed God's miracles were now powerless before his judgment. But the Lord allowed Pharaoh's heart to remain hard, and once again he refused to listen. Despite everything he had seen, he would not let the Israelites go. Then God warned of something Egypt had never witnessed before. A devastating storm of hail and fire was about to fall from the heavens, bringing destruction unlike anything in the nation's history. Would Pharaoh finally surrender, or would an even greater disaster strike Egypt? The Lord warned Pharaoh one final time before disaster struck. Tomorrow I will send the worst hailstorm Egypt has ever seen. Bring your servants and livestock under shelter, or they will die." Some of Pharaoh's officials feared the word of the Lord and hurried to protect their servants and animals. But others ignored the warning and left everything in the open fields. Then Moses stretched out his staff toward heaven. Thunder roared, lightning flashed, and massive hailstones crashed down across Egypt. Fire ran along the ground as the storm destroyed crops, shattered trees, and struck every person and animal left outside. Only the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was untouched. Once again, God protected his people while Egypt suffered his judgment. Terrified, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron. "This time I have sinned," he confessed. "The Lord is right, and I and my people are wrong. Pray that the thunder and hail will stop, and I will let you go." Moses prayed, and the storm ended. But as soon as Pharaoh saw the skies were clear, he hardened his heart once again and broke his promise. Would Pharaoh ever truly repent? Or was an even greater plague about to consume Egypt? After the devastating hailstorm, the Lord spoke to Moses once again. "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart, so that I may display my signs among the Egyptians, and that future generations will know that I am the Lord." Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh and declared, "How long will you refuse to humble yourself before God? Let his people go so they may worship him. If you refuse, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country." Pharaoh's own officials pleaded with him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the Israelites go. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" Pharaoh called Moses back and tried to bargain once again. "Go and worship the Lord. But who exactly will be going?" Moses answered, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and daughters, and with our flocks and herds, because we must celebrate a festival to the Lord." Furious, Pharaoh drove Moses and Aaron out of his palace, refusing to let everyone leave. Then the Lord told Moses, "Stretch out your hand over Egypt." Soon an east wind would bring a plague so great that it would darken the land and consume everything the hail had left behind. Would Pharaoh finally surrender, or would the locusts leave Egypt with nothing? After Pharaoh refused God's warning, Moses stretched out his staff over Egypt. The Lord sent a powerful east wind that blew across the land all day and all night. By morning, countless locusts had arrived. They covered the ground until it could no longer be seen. Never before had Egypt witnessed such an enormous swarm, and never would it happen again. The locusts devoured every plant, every tree, and every crop that had survived the hailstorm. In just a short time, nothing green remained anywhere in Egypt. Terrified, Pharaoh hurried to call Moses and Aaron. "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you," he confessed. "Please forgive my sin one more time and pray that God will take this deadly plague away." Moses prayed, and the Lord sent a mighty west wind that swept every locust into the Red Sea. Not a single locust remained in all of Egypt. But once again, Pharaoh hardened his heart. Even after God's mercy, he refused to let the Israelites go. Then God prepared a plague unlike any before it. Egypt would soon be swallowed by a darkness so deep that it could be felt. Would Pharaoh finally surrender? Or would his rebellion bring an even greater judgment? Moses obeyed, and thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days. No one could see another person or leave home, but every home in Goshen had light. Pharaoh called Moses again and said the people could go, but their livestock must stay. Moses refused. Not a hoof will be left behind. Furious, Pharaoh warned Moses never to return or he would die. Moses agreed. Was this their final confrontation before Egypt's greatest judgment? After Moses left Pharaoh's palace, the Lord revealed that one final plague would break Egypt's pride forever. God declared, "About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in the land of Egypt will die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn of the servant, and even the firstborn of the livestock." A great cry would rise throughout Egypt, unlike anything ever heard before. But among the Israelites, not even a dog would bark against any person or animal. God would once again make a clear distinction between Egypt and his people. Moses boldly warned Pharaoh of the coming judgment, but Pharaoh refused to listen. His hardened heart had reached its final moment. The Lord then gave Israel an extraordinary command. Every family was to choose a spotless lamb, sacrifice it, and place its blood on the doorposts of their homes. God promised, "When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will destroy you." Would Pharaoh finally surrender after the greatest judgment Egypt had ever seen? As night fell over Egypt, every Israelite family obeyed the Lord's command. They sacrificed a spotless lamb and placed its blood on the doorposts of their homes. Inside, they ate the Passover meal, fully dressed and ready to leave at a moment's notice. Then at midnight, the Lord passed through the land of Egypt. In every house without the blood, tragedy struck. Every firstborn, from Pharaoh's son in the palace to the prisoner in the dungeon, and even the firstborn of the livestock, died in a single night. A great cry rose throughout Egypt, for there was not a single house without someone dead. But every home marked by the blood was spared, just as God had promised. Before dawn, Pharaoh urgently summoned Moses and Aaron. Broken at last, he cried, "Leave my people. Go and worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks, your herds, and your families, and go." After centuries of slavery, Israel's long-awaited deliverance had finally begun. But would Pharaoh truly let them go? Or was one final pursuit still ahead? The Israelites left Egypt in triumph, carrying silver, gold, and clothing given to them by the Egyptians. After more than 400 years of slavery, God had fulfilled his promise and led his people out with great wealth. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light. His presence never left his people, leading them every step of the way. But when Pharaoh realized the Israelites had truly escaped, his heart changed once again. Furious, he gathered 600 of Egypt's finest chariots and sent his mighty army after them. Soon the Israelites looked behind them and saw Pharaoh's soldiers racing across the desert. Trapped between the Red Sea and the approaching army, fear spread through the camp. The people cried out to Moses, "Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die?" But Moses stood firm and declared, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again." How would God rescue his people from an impossible situation? As Pharaoh's army drew closer, the Israelites were trapped between the Red Sea and certain destruction. Fear spread through the camp, but God spoke to Moses. "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move forward." Then the Lord commanded Moses, "Stretch out your staff over the sea." Moses obeyed, and a powerful east wind blew throughout the night. The waters of the Red Sea split apart, forming towering walls on both sides, and a dry path appeared through the middle of the sea. The pillar of cloud moved behind the Israelites, standing between them and the Egyptian army. Darkness covered the Egyptians, while God's light shone upon his people. With courage, the Israelites walked across the seabed on dry ground, surrounded by walls of water on their right and on their left. But Pharaoh refused to turn back. Confident in his chariots and soldiers, he ordered his entire army to chase Israel into the sea. Would Egypt's mighty army survive the path God had opened, or was their final judgment about to begin? Pharaoh's army charged into the dry path through the Red Sea, convinced they would capture the Israelites. Chariots thundered across the seabed as Egypt's might pursued God's people. Just before dawn, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army into confusion. Their chariot wheels jammed, making it impossible to drive. Panic spread through the soldiers as they cried, "Let us flee! The Lord is fighting for Israel against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians, their chariots, and their horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand, and at daybreak the sea returned to its place. The towering walls of water crashed down, sweeping away Pharaoh's entire army. Not a single soldier survived, but the Israelites crossed safely on dry ground. That day the Lord delivered Israel from the power of Egypt forever. When the people saw God's mighty power, they feared the Lord, trusted him, and believed in his servant Moses. How would Israel respond after witnessing one of the greatest miracles in history? For more than 400 years, the Israelites suffered under the cruel rule of Egypt. They were enslaved, oppressed, and forced into hard labor. But God never forgot his covenant or the cries of his people. Through mighty signs, powerful plagues, and his outstretched hand, he shattered Pharaoh's pride and led Israel out in victory. The chains of slavery were finally broken, and a new journey of faith had begun. Their time in Egypt was over, but God's greatest miracles were only just beginning.